Hi, welcome. This is a re-recording of the first part of the Enterprise Security and macOS, a dynamic duo panel. We had a little hiccup, and so we are going to do a re-recording for you. Welcome to the panel. My name is Steve Hultquist. I go by SSH, and I've been doing this tech thing for over 3 decades. I like to tell people I have earned every white hair on my head from doing technology. I've been an engineer, an architect, and most recently, I've been a principal consultant in cybersecurity for Wipro. But before that, I was involved in multiple early stage companies, primarily as a CIO and or a CTO, overseeing the entire infrastructure and having to make sure that for an early stage company, we could keep things secure. On the panel with me today are 4 others with lots of experience in enterprise security, government security, and education. I'll start with Dan Griggs first. Dan is the founder and chief architect of Command Reporter. He's deployed and defended Macs at every level of the government and private sector, including the Pentagon, for the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Before starting Command Reporter, Dan helped write the STIGs for iOS and macOS for the US government, has helped contribute to multiple security baselines, and has been an enterprise-level Jamf admin for over 10 years. Matt Woodruff is the new Worldwide Security Solutions Lead at Jamf, helping business development around Jamf Protect, which was announced this morning, and guiding security discussions around the rest of the portfolio. He's been at Jamf for 4.5 years and was previously the senior sales engineer focused on the US federal government. Matt has also worked at Apple in both corporate and retail environments for close to 7 years, with additional experience within network security engineering as well. He assisted with the contributions to DISA STIG and now the CIS security benchmarks, and he's authored white papers around utilizing smart cards on macOS. Andrew Myers here to my left. Andrew recently joined Wipro after more than 12 years managing macOS devices. Prior to Wipro, he was managing macOS in higher ed, supporting all the macOS devices used by faculty and staff. He's going to tell us about that here in just a minute. He spent years utilizing free and open source tools and deployment methods, and he was able to successfully implement an MDM solution to easily manage all Apple devices at the university. Currently, he works on site at one of Wipro's largest Mac customers. And if you've been at Jamf in the last 7 years, you probably recognize Waqas Khan. Waqas Khan previously worked as a Mac and Jamf admin for 2 of the largest financial services firms, and he now works for Wipro as a senior solutions architect and pre-sales engineer. He advises Wipro's global clientele on adopting, integrating, and winning with Mac as a choice. He's also from Tampa, so he is loving the weather here in Minneapolis. As we get ready for the panel as well, I want to ask you all to consider this. What keeps your security teams up at night? We'll take questions and a little bit later, and so just be thinking about that and prepare some questions in advance. So as we get started, Andrew, tell us a little bit about your experience with security and the challenges in the education environment.
Thanks. Welcome, and thank everyone for coming out for our session today. I just wanted to begin. I'd spent most of my career in higher ed and recently moved into the enterprise world. But what I want to talk about today is more in my higher education experience. Not every security story is a success story. Last year, we began the process of trying to implement device enrollment and MDM solutions. For the past 10 years, we had utilized free and open source tools. So not only did we have the challenge of choosing an MDM provider, but we also had the problem of saying, hey, all this time I've been doing this for free, now I kind of need some money to do my job. I had met with many different providers for MDM solutions. I looked into device enrollment. Our university had a unique approach to it. Most places don't have the cost of DEP. Unfortunately, though, our school utilized our university store as our sole authorized reseller. So not only did we have a cost of an MDM solution, but we also had to pay the cost of DEP point of sale integration. That would include our store having to upgrade and use a third-party integrator for device enrollment, training of the employees to differentiate between what is a faculty staff purchase, what is a personal purchase, and what is a student just coming up to buy whatever. This created a big roadblock for us in terms of both pieces of MDM and DEP. During this time, I created several presentations, met with vendors throughout the time, and provided information across all levels of IT leadership. Ultimately, though, the information I provided only led to them to choose an MDM solution. They were looking for more of an immediate Band-Aid fix instead of future-proofing things to going forward. They didn't see the tie-in with MDM providing, or DEP providing an MDM tie-in and providing that solution across the board. That's kind of on me. That's where my own failure came apart in terms of the standpoint of how to handle these security decisions. Everything I had presented was based on how it affected me or the IT department and how I could better manage and deploy devices within the university. The higher up I went, the inclusion of DEP should have included the standpoint of security, not only for myself, but for the university and student data as a whole. Within the university, you have FERPA regulations with student data and what can be provided openly. And the security standpoint of DEP and MDM should have tied in directly with that in my presentation of it. So I got what I needed in an MDM solution, and finally, with pushing enough, 6 months later, we did get DEP, and I believe even to this point, they're still working on DEP integration. So it's not an easy process whenever you're taking a university store and doing these kind of things. Kind of to alleviate on that too, an even funnier story, we had tried to implement PIN requirements for people who used Exchange on macOS or iOS devices. Again, this was another well-done process. We had to present it to all VP, IT leadership. It had went through all the channels. We had approval for it. Everything was said. If you accessed any kind of university mail on your iOS device with an Exchange connection, you would receive PIN requirements to be able to erase or remove the device from access for it. It went all the way up. We started our beta testing, deploying out to separate groups and such, and we made it up to the finance department. The finance department includes a lot of FERPA-related data, student information, financial records, and so forth. The VP of finance decided that she couldn't remember a 4-digit PIN. And if she couldn't remember a 4-digit PIN, nobody should remember a 4-digit PIN. And this kind of shows within a university environment, I'm sure other people who work in higher ed see this, where just if the right person says no or doesn't like it, then it can break down for everything else. And this is kind of how it proceeded for us. And again, things should have been presented instead of more of a security standpoint for IT to more of what the data is that is affected and how it affects those, not just from an IT standpoint, but from the university and the student as a whole. So always remember that when you're presenting for the need for IT needs, be it in security or management, don't just present for yourself and for IT, present for your customer as a whole and how that affects them.
Yeah, I think when it comes to PINs, you need to make sure it's someone that can deal with numbers, right?
Yeah.
Like somebody in finance?
Preferably, yes, especially the VP of finance, but again.
Thanks for listening to this re-recording. We'll pause now and we'll take you to the live recording of the panel.
What I had to do is I had to bring them in, I had to manage them, bind them to AD, and then also apply the STIG, the security baseline, to all these computers in almost its entirety. When usually there's a lot of leeway and exceptions, but it was not the case for this deployment. We had to do everything. And the first lesson learned was acronyms. I mean, they're all completely made up. They're just made up by marketing. Most of them make no sense. I still routinely ask in meetings what acronyms means. If you don't know, obviously there's probably somebody else in that meeting who also doesn't know, so don't be afraid to ever speak up and ask, well, what does that acronym mean? I mean, because I wrote down examples in my notes here for real sentences I've heard. We just got a poem to stick that box going into the skiff and somehow get it under our ATO. That's a real sentence, and if you're like, man, that's good luck with that one. You're in too deep. You know, pull back. If you understood what that meant, you're in too deep. Other one, like our SOAR platform maps to SIM to send it to our SIM. Also a real sentence, you know, and stuff like that. And that leads to the second point of avoid ambiguity. And what I mean by more so than in, well, also in the language we use, but more communicating to users exactly what's going to happen, because the rumor mill is strong everywhere. And most organizations, when it comes to security, they have a reputation of security first, experience second. In most organizations, you know, government or not. So that's really, we have to, like, these things will happen, you know, we will turn these things off, we will leave these things on. And then really the third point would be like to just talk to your users and really go and meet them and find out their workflows and make sure that you're still enabling, you know, the business to happen, whether that's research, whether that's, you know, finance stuff or whatever you're doing. Make sure you don't stop work in the, you know, in the name of security is another big point. And those are the kind of the only few things I did get right. Everything else out here is going to be stuff I did wrong. So really what you have to start with knowing what you need to watch as far as the security controls. A lot of people would do the CIS controls if I need to know level 1. I need to know if you have file sharing turned on, what the firewall status is, stuff like that. You really need to list out everything you need to watch, and that's really driven by your threat model of like, what are you really worried about? What keeps your security team up at night? What's your most important data at that company? It could be financial data, it could be research data, and it could be, we don't want the research data being stolen. We want it, make sure it doesn't get, corrupted in any way. Somebody changes the results to change some kind of report that goes out, stuff like that. So it really depends on what you're trying to protect. And if you don't have that nailed down as like a first step, that's a really, really, really good first step. I'm not going to say you have to do it, but you probably should. And then if you're not doing all the controls, like how do you figure out which ones are the most important? And the CIS makes it really easy. It's just level 1. That's kind of the baseline, bare minimum, this is what you should be looking at. Level 2 is where if you're really security conscious, but they break it out for you in a lot of easy ways. Another way is the Mitre attack framework, where it breaks it out by more categories, like initial access, execution on the machine, authentications in the machine, and stuff like that. That way you can easily, and that's how you kind of get started if you're not going to do CIS, is you look at a column, say initial access, I want to make sure I have all of these different boxes covered. The attack framework breaks it out into different boxes of exactly what kind of initial access, remote desktop, SSH, those kinds of things. Excuse me. And then you have to really move into more how do we start watching those things. Jamf just announced a product that might help a little bit. But basically, the old way of doing it would be the extension attribute in Jamf that rolls into a smart group, and then you have Jamf policies that then key off that smart group. It's kind of like a rolling control. And the big point I want to make about that is more so make sure you're not just unit testing your scripts where you run it a bunch of times on your machine. Make sure you're system testing it, and by that I mean run all of your security control scripts on one machine and then flip the toggle on and off a whole bunch of times and make sure nothing breaks. Because more often than not, you'll have to run and rerun these policies on people who are trying to get around the corporate controls. So you want to make sure that it's always reliable and it's always tolerant of different starting states. We don't expect the firewall to be off, and we can't handle it if it was already on. Things like that. And lastly, the don't roll all the controls at once. More of like a continuous integration model, whereas as you finish the script for, let's call firewall. If you finish the script that will control the firewall and set it to the settings you want as an organization, start deploying that. Because if it breaks something, now you know exactly what broke it. Whereas if you wait for everything to be done and do one big push of, there's literally like 100 of them, you have no idea what broke that workflow. You have no idea how to really track down and troubleshoot. You have some idea. If it's networking, it's probably the firewall, but it's much, much easier on yourself if you do that kind of continuous integration model. And then lastly is never exempt your own admin machine from anything. Run the full dog food of everything. If you're an organization that takes away admin rights from your users, have a separate user that you use as an admin to do your admin rights, and then live normally as a non-admin user, and really just live in their shoes, if you will, would be my final real tip, if you will.
Those last two, my current enrollment, the network security team really could have taken those into hand with some of the stuff that they decided to turn off in production and leave most of production then down.
Production's the best test.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Matt, you were nodding. What are your thoughts?
What's that?
What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
so here's what's interesting about my role. It is new, just so that you guys are aware. We are slightly distracted. Our screens have all been changing constantly up here, so we're not meaning to look out. We want to see all of you. The goal with this, in this panel, is that I have been in a very interesting role as I listen to Dan, as he was actually a customer of mine for a number of years. You have the high ed market, also dealing with a lot of sensitive data areas. And the goal with this panel is that you guys listen to all these variations as an enterprise security and macOS. I get to have a role where I am looking through constantly at Apple's direction of macOS, iOS, iPadOS, even tvOS, understanding the depths of security, and then I start hearing something from Dan and where he was at that point, and now he's got a better role with the company and founding an endpoint security product as well. So what are their concerns, and how can Jamf Pro help? How can now Jamf Protect help? We're so glad we got this released to all of you. But you can see the dynamics of what is having to happen here for every single device with macOS and what you're having to do. So Jamf is in a unique position, and now I get to take on a bigger role of mapping together what are these controls you're having to push out, because we know that you have InfoSec, ops, SecOps, security operations, incident response teams, forensics, that are constantly whispering in your ear telling you, we need to see this. We need to have visibility. If we don't have visibility, you better lock it up, control it, because honestly, we don't care that much about the user experience. We just need to have controls over it. One of the best statements that Dan just mentioned is, eat your own dog food. Apply it to yourself. See the restrictions that are getting applied to you, and what is that married up against when you start looking at macOS and the depths of the security that are within it that you need to understand better, because it's not the other operating system, as I'll call it. It is not that the differences between the OSs are so dramatic, it's tying all of that together. And so I love having the dynamics, and Wakas is actually going to go through the enterprise side of it. But our goal is just to hopefully curate a lot of questions out of you, because they've got a lot of experience, and I'll just tag on.
Yeah, I was going to say, Matt, I haven't heard a SOC whisper anything in somebody's ear. They're yelling at us, right?
Yeah.
So, Wakas, what's your experience in enterprise?
Thank you, Steve. This is my first time here on a panel of this size, so I apologize if I trip. I started off as a lonely Mac admin about 15, 16 years ago, before we had a platform like Jamf Nation, and before Jamf started bringing us all together here in beautiful Minneapolis. So thank you, Jamf. Again, can't thank enough for that. I've been attending this conference for 8 years now, since 2012. And it's incredible to see the evolution and the year-over-year growth of the attendance here. Jamf Nation community is truly unparalleled in what they have delivered to admins, engineers alike, and to anyone who works with Apple technology in any capacity. I've had the opportunity and really a privilege to work for some of the largest and most technologically diverse organizations in the last 15 years. And needless to say that all of these opportunities came with their own separate set of challenges. I'm sure a lot of you would agree, trying to administer, manage, and even promote Macs in predominantly Windows-centric organizations is quite a feat. And when you start proposing to your colleagues and counterparts that allowing Macs as a choice not only delights the employees and attracts new talent, it actually provides a more secure and manageable platform. It certainly raises some understandably valid questions and some skeptical eyebrows. Numerous times I've presented in front of security teams and used tools like Apple's device enrollment program, their hardware with T2 chip, CIS benchmarking, ISO certifications that Jamf has achieved, more recently adding conditional access through Intune and to top it all off, Jamf Pro's cloud hosting services, to make my point about why this platform, in my humble opinion, is head and shoulders above its more established but less revered cousin. My goal has always been, unlike security teams' prerogative, my goal has always been to improve users' experience without hindering or impeding their productivity. Sometimes I was told, and I'm not kidding, that Macs provide security through obscurity. Because the numbers are far fewer than Windows, not many hackers or people with ill intent bother to develop malware or exploits to attack its OS. And my answer to that has always been, how can that be a knock on macOS or the hardware it runs on? If anything, there should be more of a rationale to use this platform in the enterprise. I've also had very enlightening and very productive conversations with the security teams where we've drilled down their requirements in categories like acceptable risk versus non-acceptable risk, or high, moderate, or low impact vulnerabilities, majority of whom can be neutralized using a best-in-class MDM like Jamf. To tackle some of the more complex and nuanced issues, I myself have utilized Jamf and Apple's professional services. Now, if you were to add to your tool set something like CMD Reporter, which I'm sure Dan would love to elaborate on, for real-time monitoring and reporting, that not only significantly elevates your security posture of your service, but it also checks most, if not all, the boxes for your security teams and the core requirements that they put forward. Combine the security of macOS with the impressive list of features, some of the new features we saw just in the keynote before, and you truly have a dynamic duo in the enterprise like no other. So, thanks.
Thanks, you guys. So if you have questions for these guys, there are a couple of mics in these two aisles here. If you'd go stand behind a mic, we'll take those questions. As you guys are making your way there, let me ask this. One of the things as a CIO that always bothered me was the impact of security software for the end user. So if we put too much security stuff onto a system, the end users would see problems and would get to the point where they either wanted to tear them off or they would stop using it or whatever. What's your experience and what's the benefit of Mac in a mixed environment when it comes to those kinds of things?
That's my setup right now with the company I'm tied in with. The company's probably 96, 97% PC based and only about 3% Mac. So they want the whole experience on macOS to pretty much mirror that of Windows. Every single portion of it is locked down. So essentially what makes macOS, that part of it and the familiarity with it, all of that right now is locked down. And that's my approach right now, is to gather this information here that we've all kind of been discussing as it is and present that in a way that higher management actually understands and wants to present that as a choice. I mean, why not provide the computer that you receive as a benefit to the job that you have at hand and not something that you're going to take and receive and be like, this does nothing that I actually want to do with it. Just give me a PC and let me go on with my work.
You want to say anything, Dan? No? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Good morning, gentlemen. Thanks so much. Wakas, it's always good to see you up here. And welcome to the big stage. So we saw some really interesting announcements today around security, and I think it's going to give customers a greater sense around telemetry. But I think as we continue to push the Mac outward into more and more enterprises, those security challenges are becoming more complex. And so as a Mac specialist at Apple, I have an opportunity to talk to a lot of customers. And I'm curious, Wakas, or for the panel, what are your thoughts? What are you seeing around, data loss prevention solutions? What are the kinds of things, clearly, there's things out there today, but they really impact the user experience, which, none of us want. We've been able to deliver great solutions for deployment management, enrollment that don't impact user experience, and I don't think that we're interested in locking things down at the expense of that user experience. So I'm curious, what are you thinking about, and what are you seeing, and how are you talking to your customers that say we really have data loss prevention requirements that maybe aren't as robust on the Mac today as we need them to be?
So I worked in different organizations where the security requirements have called for specifically for DLP solutions. And unfortunately, the DLP solutions out right now, I'm not counting Jamf Protect, but or what it might offer, but the solutions that are out, like McAfee, like Symantec, do not give a good experience to the user. It actually hinders the productivity, it hinders the performance of the system. That's what my testing has been. That's what the feedback the users have given to me have been. I've also been a big promoter of admin credentials or admin access to the users in the enterprise. Now, obviously, security teams have come back to me, especially in the financial services arena, asking me why would I be proposing that, or why is that a need? Well, purely because of what I can lock down using the MDM with the with the other controls at my disposal. That's the reason why I'm proposing that, or that's the reason, that's what I present to the security teams. With that said, DLP solutions, one of them should be available for demo next door, like Endpoint Protector, is something that I have proposed to the company or a couple of companies that I worked at, where it does provide that security, or those, it checks off those boxes for the security teams where they can confirm or they can deny access to external ports or other similar accesses. So with that said, whatever Jamf Protect's going to offer is just going to absolutely be a boon to the security teams, or to what we can provide to the security teams.
Yeah, so to add on to that, so Eric, thank you for the question. What you'll find, though, as well, is that if you are in the regulated industry, we've heard from most of you, it is a component that you have to be able to answer. Meaning, we know that there's sensitive data, whether it be social security numbers, and are they taking screenshots of that? Is it within the screenshot? Did they plug in a USB, put it on the USB? How are those dynamics getting played out? We've heard very clearly that is a component that needs to be addressed, and so far, as Waqas mentioned, there's not really a great solution that really doesn't hinder the performance on a Mac. We've even heard stories, there was one, actually 3 enterprises that have come to us stating, we tried to implement a DLP solution before the new endpoint security frameworks came out. We're hitting about 32 to 36% impact on consistent CPU utilization. That's tremendously difficult to handle when you're an end user that's just trying to do your job.
So I will add that we cracked it. We have a DLP thing coming out end of December. It's all relationship-based. We have tried to avoid scanning files if at all possible. We do an initial one, but then it's all because of the data feed we have with CMD Reporter of did you copy and paste between these two? Now the second file is also protected, and now it has limits on how it can move. I want to get to more questions, so I'll stop it there. But if you want to know more, just come see me after.
Yeah, in Jamf Protect session at 2:45, we'll talk more about it as well, but we're good.
Yeah, good. Right over there.
So my question relates more to the culture of Apple versus enterprise, where Apple doesn't play nice, basically, and says, you got to do it this way if you want this feature. And security is like, no, we need to know exactly what they're doing. How would you guys recommend, dealing with InfoSec and everybody above us and just trying to convince them to say, hey, we need to do it the Apple way?
It's actually more like best practices, whether those best practices are coming from, or that's how I have approached it, whether those best practices are coming from Apple itself, or whether it's coming from Jamf that provides those controls, is how I have approached it. And also listening, having conversations with the security teams. The approach that I've taken repeatedly is asking them what is acceptable, what is non-acceptable, or what is high, low, moderate risk. Those and putting them down on paper and getting their approval on, okay, in a past organization, they were not cool with giving users admin access, even if, I've presented like a number of times. Eventually, I got the services from Jamf Pro Services. They created an Elevate tool, privilege elevation tool. This is prior to SAP coming out with their tool. And we were able to resolve that problem. So they gave me something, I gave them something. It's kind of give and take. And that's how I was able to progress the proposal of, okay, let's now that we have a couple of years in, let's try to maximize this and maybe do some sort of a program where users can pick and choose which platform they want.
I also think it helps to reference standards which is what I've done as a CIO. And you know, with the STIG standards and the CIS standards, I think that's another way to do it. Did you want to say something about that, Dan?
I also want to add, Apple has a lot of sales and consulting engineers who are excellent resources because it really depends on, you know, what you're talking about, like specifically, is it APNS or whatever it is, you know, how your security team feels, and then, you know, what are you trying to accomplish? So it's all so specific that they have a lot of good resources that can really help you with those discussions.
And then one additional, two components actually to that. The Apple Professional Services Group actually has an excellent Mac Readiness review that they can come in and provide an incredible report to give you a view into the perspectives of how is it different. Because handling macOS and macOS management is different. But in the end, there's also the component of InfoSec's going to tell you, we just don't have the visibility to understand, is macOS doing what it's supposed to be doing? And that is the reason why we came out with Jamf Protect, is to give you that visibility into Xprotect and malware removal tool and Gatekeeper and what are those functions actually doing, and then present a very nice view, hopefully they like the dashboard, and showing, you know, this is the level to which Xprotect is protecting your Mac. And then you have now an answer to take them.
Thanks. I think there's third parties that can help too. I'll just say the one that we work for happens to be one. Yes.
Thank you. Hey there. Thanks for this panel, first of all. It's really interesting. I should have written my question down because now I'm going to misword it. But essentially, what's your view or advice on the focus change from device protection to data protection, where a lot of enterprises and entities are going more towards storing things in the cloud, whether it be OneDrive or Dropbox, or even iCloud, I guess, in some way you can use. But what do you think the focus should be, and to what extent do you think it'll impact users? For example, with things like scanning, which, Daniel, I'm really interested in talking to you about how you've gotten around that, where it tries to scan everything that's synced down to a user, even if they don't have to use it sometimes.
So it really, I think it's still on the endpoint, really, because there's lots of data protections as it is in the cloud to make sure that, you know, external entities don't somehow log in to OneDrive or something like that to then, you know, download all your data. But then also you're using all these endpoints and all these iOS devices to look at, view, download, edit, modify all this other data as well. So you can't just not do the endpoint piece. And everybody thought the endpoint piece was too hard because of all the resource constraints. And you know, if we really do all the scanning, it really hits the CPU really hard. And all those other kind of gotchas. They're like, oh, it's so much easier just to secure it in the cloud. And you know, this is the cynical part of me saying, well, like, they just wanted to sell another product, if you will. But really, I think it's still the onus is on the endpoint, because that's really where the data is created and modified and really looked at.
Yeah, from my perspective, it can be both. So it's possible to do work on the cloud side of things to understand how sensitive the information is there, how it's stored, how it's accessed, by whom it's accessed, all those kinds of things. And so a fair amount of security management can happen on the cloud side, and then adding in to when somebody looks at it, when somebody accesses it, and managing it on the device. So I think you can actually do it both ways. And what I tend to focus on is a more systemic view, like what's the overall life cycle of the data, and where do I have an opportunity to answer questions like that and to make sure that only the right people are accessing it and they have to be authorized and those kind of pieces. Hope that helps.
There's also a component of user experience that I was thinking about with that. Let's take a great example of where security is going for MAM. You have a MAM solution. You're trying to control, you know, that data source might be connected directly to a cloud source. Let's say Azure as an example, or Google. And you set up a MAM solution. That means that they're trying their best to control the access to the cloud data and how it's synced, where it's going, how is copy and paste actions going to happen. But then, what if they enjoy using Keynote? Are they able to control that source of data as it's getting used in Keynote because it's a superior product? How is that going to work in those environments where there is a consistent use of privilege sets and monitorization, and then applying telemetry on what's happening to all of that? So that's where also there's a give and take on really understanding what's the user experience impact when you're only looking at cloud-based security.
Thanks. Thank you. Over there.
Hey guys, I was just generally curious to your security philosophies on third-party patching apps, especially ones that fall outside of the scope of patch management in Jamf. Do you guys manually patch? Do you set deadlines? Do you just make available? Do you not patch? Or just your general philosophies?
Third-party patching or third-party apps, what I've used or the workflow that I've utilized is the third-party applications that I'm providing through the enrollment workflow or through self-service is what I'm using to patch, or what I'm patching. Anything else comes directly from that application itself. What I do propose to my users or to encourage them to use is something, are apps that are release day ready, so that if there is a new version of the operating system that's out, they can jump onto the newest version of that application, which is compatible with the new version of the operating system. And other applications that I am providing, I'm responsible for that as an admin to provide the patching. I use Jamf's patching mechanism to patch those.
I roll my own patching. I'm still an admin, so what I do basically is as soon as it comes out, I make it available in self-service. And then I have a reminder pop up about a week or two out, depending on what app it is, it's a little bit. And then I think it's after 2 weeks, really, we force that to be updated. If it's a Word or something like that, we do quit the app and apply that update. But it's kind of that waterfall effect of you get most people when it's convenient, and then you only force it on a small subset of folks, really. I found it to be a good balance of everything.
Currently, I go through just one large fail swoop, usually about every 2 weeks, push all patches as possible, and typically just reboot the machine as a whole. It's pretty user intrusive. Again, it's kind of what I walked into with it. I'd like to try to make it a little bit more user friendly with it, but most of the patch management handled right now is very obtrusive and comes through on a bi-weekly basis, patches everything, reboots, and there you go.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Here.
Already messing up here. My question's more political than technical.
Layer 8.
Nothing to do with the election. Let's get into it. All right, right on. There's a lot of frustration around our current endpoint solution, but we have to have it because of auditors and reasons. And so with the announcement of Jamf Protect, I immediately slacked my team saying, guys, I bet this will be awesome. The first question is, will it work on both platforms? Because what we have now is poor, but we have one single pane of glass to look at everything, and it gives us terrible information, inaccurate. So how reasonable is it for me to go to my team and say, look, let's take on a second solution. We are a mostly Mac office. Is that a reasonable expectation for like the InfoSec people on my team and even my CIO to say, and what's my sales pitch, basically?
Yeah. I think part of it is what we've talked a little bit about here is user experience. Some of the things that you saw earlier in the presentation about why people want to have Macs anyway, right? So as a CIO, as somebody that's kind of done this and had to pitch it to CFO, my expectation is, look, IT's job is actually to lower the obstacles for the rest of the employees so they can get their jobs done easier. Now, I admit that I'm not necessarily the majority philosophy in IT, right? So for me, it's like, is it worth it or not? And what you said standing up there to me says it is, because look, the information we have isn't very good, it's not very consistent, it doesn't give us what, right? There's this whole list of litany that you gave me. So again, as an executive listening to that, I'm like, okay, what's the burden on the SOC or whatever your security side is? What's the burden on them for having a second view? And can you use something like a SIM to aggregate from these? I don't know the answer to that question, by the way. But are there ways of alerting and providing a smoother path to looking at what I, as a SOC guy, need to look at today? Is there a faster path to that? Yeah. Do you guys want to jump in?
What I always do whenever I come in with a big ask like that of, I know you have this single pane of glass now, but it's pretty terrible on macOS and things like that, is always the give and take of like, all right, well, if you get this second product, well, then we can all send it to Splunk or whatever SIM you're using. that kind of like, well, then you still get that single pane of glass. It's just like a different way kind of thing. So it's not just ask, ask, ask. It's always, I'm doing this for you if you do this for me kind of transaction. I know it's a little bit simplistic in that because it really depends on the situation.
Yeah.
But usually security teams love that one thing they have to log into to see everything.
Yeah. I'm going to try to get these
like
last two questions in, so I'm going to stop us at that.
Yeah, cool.
Why don't you go ahead?
I'm short. So I appreciate the concerns about security in, let's say, the C-level stack. But the company, or our client, is far more concerned about intellectual property leaving the company. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you might approach this from your standpoint, like from the products that you use and deploy, but also what kind of conversation would you have with the C-level stack to let them understand? This is all to say that we have a really Mac-friendly cybersecurity group. So
Gotcha.
whatever you guys have, I will definitely be taking back to the office.
Andrew, do you want to jump in on that?
Lock everything down. No nothing. No USB access, no network access needed. Simple local transfers.
And there's cadence.
Yeah.
That's not going to fly.
Yeah. I deal with that currently, and it's kind of twofold. I mean, you have to explain from the security standpoint to the users, but then you also have to have open discussions with those users to find out how you can create that better interaction between it. Currently, we only allow one single cloud sharing standpoint, so there's no iCloud sharing or anything of that. We utilize OneDrive for one and all. So a lot of it has to come down to educating those on how they can use those provided interfaces to do what needs to be done. So with OneDrive, setting it up on an enrolled device, showing them how to use that, how they can easily move data from one place to another, even though you have those limitations. But you really have to communicate between both parties, and a lot of it has to have discussions with the users of that product to find out what kind of problems they're having with it and how you yourself can alleviate or provide the education on how to use that piece of it.
Awesome, thanks. We're going to do one more. I'm going to invite you guys to our booth because we have coffee in the morning and beer in the afternoon. Please drop by and check it out. Okay, go ahead with your question.
All right, I'll try and make this brief since I know you're almost out of time. The question I have is regarding that kind of InfoSec SOC apathy regarding the user experience, specifically regarding to emerging technologies. So for us, we always have the experience where they want to review like cloud-based new technologies before we can start officially beta testing. So we don't really have the opportunity to say what improvements it would provide. I was just wondering what your experience is regarding that kind of apathy.
I like that. Waqas, I'll let you answer in just a second. One thing that I've done, by the way, is I've put Macs in the SOC. So I have people with Macs in the SOC using them, and it actually helps with things like that. But go ahead.
This is where I've made use of any services that we use that have beta programs and get security teams in on the beta programs. Whether it's Jamf's beta program, Appleseed for IT, they just released. If any of you are not aware of Appleseed for IT, please contact your Apple rep. And then obviously Microsoft's own Office Insider Track and stuff. So get the security teams, or what I've done is I've gotten the security teams to jump on that, do their tests, along with my testing. Let them run through the paces of that, point out the problems or issues or anything that they see, because they're more aware of what kind of security requirements they have. So then I can take that into the feedback channel of these services like Jamf provides.
Yeah.
Another thing I would add is go get a machine just like at an Apple store on the company dime, and then say, no company data is ever on this machine. We're going to test all these new kind of cloud technologies just with this machine, not with all fake data, with no real accounts, no real connection to anything corporate at all. And that's how you can kind of review and look at a lot of these cloud providers without really digging into all those different approvals and things like that. At least what I did. It's up to you.
Yeah, get them involved, I think, is the big answer. Thank you. So, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Enjoy your JNUC.